Hey guys, welcome back. BDCKR here. We're back with our weekly Q&A thing. This is season 13, episode 19. Why don't we jump right in? Do you want to talk about the team or do you want to talk about real life
Let's
first?
do the team because I feel like if we get sidetracked on the real life, we might be at it for a while. And I want to make it at least give the introduction so people can understand what they're watching.
Yeah, we'll do the team first and then we'll get into the election special.
So this is season 13, where we're just spending more time with each challenge character before we expect them to come in so that we have maybe a bit more information, maybe a bit more insight when we actually end up doing the recap on Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
And this is potentially likely Rebirth Ravens week. And this is one of my absolute favorite teams. It's not the fastest, but it's got such super synergy. It's almost ridiculous that they're not the same universe characters. Mm-hmm. So Rebirth Raven, Static, and Hawkgirl. Hawkgirl because we need to tag in and out a lot to control it because all of our characters are either geared or exist in a way that tagging in and tagging out is very useful for them. Rebirth Raven, she's a star. She comes in and steals a lot of power. Problem is, sometimes the opponent doesn't have a lot of power. We fix that problem with Static.
Mm-hmm.
Static Special 1 not only steals, but does a lot of hits. So if it's unblocked, opponent gets a lot of power.
Mm-hmm.
And then we steal it. And it is so good against so many teams that are normally a pain in the butt to fight. And even against the teams that are a pain in the butt for everybody, the Red Sun, Green Lantern teams. If you time it right, if you do things correctly, none of them are a problem. Some characters that might be sort of interesting. So, for example, an Arkham Knight team that has Arkham Knight back row to save them. You can see our strategy where, if we can, we try to get Hawkgirl in to finish off Arkham Knight back row because she's got Astro Harness, and that means Hawkgirl's not as vulnerable to being knocked out by Arkham Knight back row if she gets a stunned Special 1 in.
Yeah.
And even if she does, even if she does knock one of our characters because we can't get Hawkgirl in time where we accidentally knock or do something to one of Arkham Knight Batgirl's teammates, Rebirth Raven or Static, the way they're geared with Hawkgirl is still enough. Like it's wild. This is one of those teams where neither one of them is great, but together they have amazing synergy. But even if you knock one of them out, they're still good enough.
Yeah.
Gaslight Batman, who would normally give us fits and starts because we lose our tag-in power bar from Master's Death card, but we still get it from Tattoo Totem. Not a problem, because then you just have to be a bit more careful. Let him hit us with a bomb and get us burning a little bit, but then we just have to time our Special 1 right, and then we give him a bar of power, but we stun him, and Rebirth Raven can come in without any kind of danger, steal his power, and just get rid of him.
Mm-hmm.
Any power dampening teams, you know what? We don't mind. We're stealing your power anyways. And because it's Tattoo Totem, we don't have to worry about Master's Death Cart being a little bit sort of hindered by the decreased power generation.
Mm-hmm.
We still have a 1 bar. And it's not the power that's generated that's important. It's the skulls, not skulls, the pitter-patter of the Master's Death Cart coming in that lets us on the second tag and strip all the gears off because we've given Static Tattoo Totem, Master's Death Cart, and Claw of Horus. And then the other one, that's the other entry hazard I think is interesting is Arkham Knight Harley Quinn. And I think all we really need to do with Arkham Knight Harley Quinn on the opponent's team is just make sure that she is, if she's off screen, that the opponent that's there doesn't have a full bar of power so that we can tag in and block if we need to and not block if we don't need to.
Mm-hmm.
And there's really not much danger at all. All the other concerns for other teams, Astro Harness is not a concern. We just strip it off with Static. 2 pieces of LexCorp reverse power drain is not a concern because if Static is working, they're stunned and they stay stunned while we steal their power, but they gain power. So that maybe they have 3 bars of power. They're just sitting there stunned. We just knock them out before they have a chance. And let's say on the off chance we don't knock them out, Enchantress Companion gear card just handles it. Like it disables their specials. And then we can just do the same routine. As long as we time things right, we bring back Static, we stun them, come in and steal their power again. And if they happen to be, say, again, Batman Ninja Batman, who is taking almost no damage, we'll just tag in and out, keep them stunned, keep them specials disabled. The only real concern, I think, is special dodgers, because we've made this team up to be really
special heavy,
completely specials. But that's only if they get very lucky, because they really have to dodge every single special. We just need one to land properly, and once they're stunned by static, or they get hit by Raven, who does a huge amount of damage, then we're okay. And the beauty really is there's just so much synergy in this team with this loadout that as a team of 3, they're great. As a team of 2, they're still great. Like if Hawkgirl gets knocked out early, the team is pretty much still just as strong because we only need her for her passive. And if either Rebirth or even Static's knocked out, it's still a decent team. It's a little bit more of a struggle, but because of the way we've geared them, right? Because Static gets power every time he tags in, and his special 2 does decent damage, and Rebirth Raven does the stealing, so she's not really any kind of trouble handling the opponents. It's a spectacular team.
So there we go. Do you want to move on to sort of the real life stuff now?
Oh my goodness. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, who are listening to this, we are Canadian. We just had the Canadian federal election yesterday.
Yeah.
Woo-wee!
I think it went, given what was possible, I think it was the best outcome that seems likely or possible to me.
So I should probably do a quick recap for all of yours who haven't been paying attention, whether they're Canadian or not Canadian or not.
Yeah, but we've been talking a decent amount about politics.
So the details, the shape of it really is, there's multiple parties. It's a first past the post system.
Which is like the standard sort of voting system.
Yeah, I mean, there's countries that don't do that, though.
Yeah, but it's the most common one. It's probably
that
the one that you're using.
Right.
If you're using one.
So, and up until maybe January, it was looking like the Conservative Party, they're named the Conservatives. There was a previous iteration of the party that was Progressive Conservatives, but it's been taken over by the Reform Party, who have rebranded themselves as Conservative, but they're really sort of right-wing and Western Canada centric. Like they focus on Western Canada kind of issues. And they had a 26% lead over the incumbent Liberal Party that had been around for 3 elections, like 10 years or something.
With Justin Trudeau.
So they were expected to win. It was being led by Pierre Poilievre. Lots of slogans, lots of, appeals to feelings without a lot of practical. There was some concrete stuff, but it wasn't very practical, goal-directed kind of concrete stuff. It was stuff just to make you feel strongly enough about what you wanted to vote for. So it was looking not great for the Liberal Party. Mm-hmm. And then Justin Trudeau, who was leading the Liberal Party, stepped down. Mark Carney, who was never elected up until now, stepped in. And Trump started threatening Canada with annexation. And
well, he had been doing that while Justin Trudeau was in.
Sure. It became much more vocal, I feel like. It just became a bigger part of our news cycle where people were feeling much more protective of Canada.
Yeah.
So that's where we stood. So Conservatives were supposed to be winning. Their leader was not particularly popular, even though the party was popular. And then things flipped. Okay. What did you want to say about it? That's a recap.
Yeah, just different stuff. So, yeah, I think given how it could have gone, right? So there are sort of 2 other parties that are broadly progressive or left-leaning, right, in slightly different ways, other than the Liberals, right?
Right.
We've got the NDP, right? And then I would call the Green Party, like, relatively left-leaning, just on green, because that's their main platform. Right. And I think that environmentalism has become increasingly like a more liberal left-wing thing.
Some of the green policies require a little bit of sort of anti-capitalism.
Yeah.
That it favors the environment over financial interests.
Yeah, and so, I mean, NDP has done more better or worse, but NDP for the past few election cycles has not been doing great, right? But the
NDP was the official opposition for a while.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, they did not bad under Jack Layton.
Yeah.
Now we're going a little bit too much.
But anyway, so the important part is that basically this was a race between the Liberals and the Conservatives,
right?
And so the Liberals won with a.
They were 2 months ago. They were expected to lose.
Yeah, they won. But they won with a minority government, pretty close to a minority, a few seats away. And if you look at the number of seats that the NDP
pretty close to majority,
to a majority, more than 50%, a few seats away from a majority government. And if you look at what the NDP makes up, you only need to capture, I think 3 out of the 8, or maybe 4, to have like a true majority. So with a coalition government, basically the idea is that if the NDPs and the Liberals can agree on something, then they're functionally in a majority government.
And they're more likely to agree on something than the Liberals and the Conservatives, right?
Yeah.
Because if you just talk turkey for the numbers, I think there's 342 or 43. So you need 172 seats to have the majority. The Liberals are at either 168 or potentially 169. So they're 3 or 4 short. And the NDP have somewhere between 5 and 7 seats.
Yeah.
So that's more than enough. And that, to me, I mean, because
to say that out of all the options that were reasonable to win, which is say Liberals or Conservatives, right, overall, right, to have the most seats of anybody, I'd rather the Liberals to the Conservatives.
Oh, sure. And why? But why? We need to talk a little bit about that, right?
Well, we can get into it a little bit more, but just to say that I prefer the Liberals over the Conservatives, but also I wouldn't say that I'm specifically a fan of the Liberals. It's just the best of the options that are presented to me. So I think having external accountability to another party that is generally more progressive than them is good, right? But I think the Liberals winning is good. So if I could have, before the election, said what outcome is best, I would have probably, out of what I thought was possible, right? What seemed reasonable or likely, I would have said the outcome that I would want is a lot of Liberals, right? But probably a Liberal minority government that can still maneuver without much support from the Conservatives without they have support from the NDP, right? So the fact that that's exactly what happened, right, means that I think for what is practical to expect, I think that's exactly what I would have wanted, right? Yeah. So you wanted to talk about why we support Liberal over Conservative?
I'll tell you what. I mean, at this point, I think if we didn't have as good a candidate as Mark Carney had been, I still would have been voting essentially against the Conservatives.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, for a lot of different reasons, I think there's a few sort of examples that sort of sum up the idea, because they're conservative and socially regressive. Mm-hmm. So the leader, Pierre Poilievre, the campaign has been very much slogans, a lot of sort of empty kind of promises, but the underlying core of it that bothered me the most was the regressiveness of some of their policies. So Pierre Poilievre's been pretty much a career politician, got elected in his 20s, has been representing some riding in Ottawa, Carleton for 20 years.
Yeah.
And he just recently did an interview where he was talking about, I've basically been saying the same stuff that I've been saying, and I've been consistent all the time. And then it cuts to different clips of when he's younger saying just really ignorant things. Like, I believe that marriage is between man and woman and nobody else. I believe, just stuff like that. And I think that's what I'm afraid of, because he was also a supporter of the truckers' convoy that occupied Ottawa and ground things to a halt for weeks. Mm-hmm. It was just a lot of stuff. And I think I've been thinking about this a little bit, and it's not even so much that it's focusing on the negative, right? I'm not a big fan of focusing on negative campaigns, but I think sometimes you have to when you're worried about what's happening. And I feel like that the Liberals avoided that this time, but I think that there are certain cases where you need to. But the difference is that when every time I saw something from the Conservatives saying something negative about the Liberals, it was evasive and a little dishonest. Mm-hmm. Like, it was misleading. At the best, it was misleading, and at worst, it was a little dishonest. And I'd like to pretend that I'm a bigger person, and it's the principle of just running a negative campaign. But you know what? Sometimes if that's what your opponents give you or what the alternatives are, I think you need to be aware that something bad could happen. And I think part of it is that when you listen to a lot of the ways that they were talking during the campaign, it resembled a lot of what Trump was saying.
Yeah. I saw a tweet that was pretty funny, which was that Trump is so unpopular that he's losing elections in other countries.
Oh, that's cool.
Which was pretty entertaining.
Yeah.
You know, and one thing also of note that happened that's like, in my opinion, a win is that Polyev lost his riding.
Oh, I said that right last night when we were talking about this. I said, so, you know, I can't really expect anything better, but what would be the cherry on top?
Oh, no, you said that tonight.
Oh, no, I said that last night too.
We didn't know last night.
No, I was talking. No, that would have been. It would be too much to ask. I'm saying that as a thing in theory. And the kicker is, so not the concession speech. It was sort of concession speech from Polyev was saying that, and let me just read you an excerpt from it. So it's a combination of him trying to stay on, but also talking up the election results. So this is the transcript. Now, my message to Canadians, the promise that was made to me and to all of you, is that anybody from anywhere could achieve anything, that through hard work, you can get a great life, you have a nice, affordable home on a safe street. My purpose in politics is and will continue to be to restore that promise. We've gained well over 20 seats, and we got the highest share of vote our party has received since 1988. We denied the NDP and Liberals enough seats to form a coalition government, and we did all this in a very difficult environment.
One thing that was kind of entertaining is as he was saying that last part, that we denied NDP and Liberals enough seats to form a coalition government, during the broadcast of that news, they were updating the projected seat counts, and they gave the Liberals one seat during that. And so, like, a few seconds after he said that, the votes ticked up, and it made the projections made that not true. Like right as he was saying that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of stuff to unpack there. Like just that's not the Canadian dream. That's the American dream, and it's not even that reasonable. But to me, the part that jumps out at me here is, despite the party improving their fortunes in this election, he lost his own seat. And true. I feel like this is very personal. That despite a sentiment across the country, despite having represented that riding for 20 years, people decided in that riding where they knew him best, and where across the country there is a sentiment thinking that we want change. The change that they decided they were going to have was not changing from Liberals to Conservative, but changing, we don't want Pierre Poilievre. We want a different representative for our federal government.
Yeah, it's true. So it is one of those things where, like, this is the start, right? This is a big moment where things can either get better or get worse. And now, this is sort of day one in terms of what we are going to continue looking at for what Mark Carney actually does, right? And how this goes. And so I think that for a lot of people who have limited time and resources to do stuff, right? Voting is one of the biggest things that you can do. And in terms of the return on investment, it's one of the higher return on investment decisions you can make. But, you know, we do need to, and I'm not going to give Mark Carney a pass just because he's liberal and he's better than Pierre would have been, right? So now's when I get to be a little happy. I think the outcome is the best I could hope for. And now we get to sort of roll up our sleeves and start, looking at what we've got. We
avoided the big obvious problem, but doesn't mean we're safe yet.
Yeah, it's true.
Because it's right now it's still hopeful, but
safe yet is also an interesting thing, because I think you're never like all the way safe, right? It's all just better or worse over and over again, because life is too complicated that there's just, you snap your fingers and stuff is just fixed or good, right? Well, and it can be good, but it's really a question of making it better.
So what's cool, when you said earlier about how Trump is so popular, he's losing elections in other countries, is I think one of the biggest impacts on this election was something that I saw happen when 9/11 happened. And it's a funny takeaway, because it's not what most people sort of get from 9/11. And I think we talked about this in real life. I don't think I've talked about it on this channel. So before 9/11, when there were people who would hijack planes, right? And they'd say, take us to Cuba or take us to whatever. And it was almost like a joke sometimes. But the prevailing wisdom was that you just stay quiet, you do what the hijackers want, and then you will survive and get away safely and let the police take care of it once they land.
Yeah.
And after 9/11, completely changed. Like, the ability of hijackers to be able to do that again is gone, because nobody thinks that if they're on a plane that's hijacked, that they're going to survive. Or they don't have a reasonable expectation of it. So they think, we're going to die anyways. Let's do what we can to see if we can give ourselves a chance, or at least mess up what they're trying to do. Yeah. And so people just don't believe that anymore. It's not going to be a reasonable strategy. And if people just want to hijack a plane and survive and get somewhere, it's not going to happen. Right? Mm-hmm. And I feel like this is what happened with this election, because what we learned from the U.S. was, okay, so let's look back. When Hillary Clinton lost the election, I assumed, like many other people, that the institutions themselves, the Republican Party, the government, it would be enough to resist one person trying to do bad things. And for the first term, it was mostly true, right? I mean, obviously there's stuff that was happening that was just wild, that was totally unexpected, right?
And there are stories that were coming out about a lot of people, like, just not doing things that he had told them to do, right? There was a lot of people who were actually actively acting against Trump's orders, instructions, and intentions to try to sort of damage control, right?
Right, but there's still some pretty big examples of things that happened that shouldn't have happened, right? The fact that Trump was extorting the Ukrainian government to manufacture evidence against the Bidens in exchange for money that Congress had already approved. The insurrection of January 16th. I mean, January 6th, sorry. There's a bunch of examples. But in my mind, I thought, okay, so if people really believe this, like the whatever he was selling at the time, maybe instead of trying to fight so hard and wasting all our energies on that, it's like, maybe those voters have to learn, because they need to see for themselves what it would mean to vote for somebody who had bad intentions.
Yeah.
And the second term put the lie completely to those things, right? Because you could have convinced yourself, well, Biden's in, he only got one term, Trump only got one term. But in retrospect, like you're saying, there was an ineptness to it. There was people who were actively fighting it and people who were just not very effective in implementing the agenda.
Yeah.
That kept it from being more destructive. And now you're seeing the second term around where they had more opportunities and better plans. Like with Doge, right? Hiring, firing, losing all that money. I think we're really seeing that you can't just let people...
Yeah. Sorry, when you say losing all that money, what do you mean?
Well, originally Doge was supposed to save money, right?
Yeah.
And now with the accounting stuff and how they've had to fire people and then rehire them.
Yeah.
And the lost productivity combined with the cost of actually firing people and paying them whatever they're owed. I mean, not the people who are on probation who have been less than a year, but I'm just saying, like, all that kind of disruption has cost more in productivity than if they'd just done nothing.
Okay, because I would say that I definitely had the sense that on the balance, what Doge was doing was exceptionally damaging, but I haven't seen anything to the effect of the fact that there's like a meaningful case to be made that they've lost money.
Yeah, they've wasted money. They've wasted. I mean, if not
there's
literally,
a lot of
not literally
there's a lot of
dollars,
money wasted for sure.
Not literally, but it's the same way we talk about, say, traffic congestion.
Yeah,
waste money, waste productivity, because there's hours people waste in cars, right? So there's a bunch of stuff where things that should have gotten done aren't, because...
And then they need to get done, and then doing them once you've blown up the process makes them... Okay, interesting, yeah.
So there... But what we learned was people will never learn. So you see people who are actually directly affected, and instead of thinking we did something wrong, there are people who are still holding fast the idea that they just... This is something bad that happened. It just shouldn't have happened to them. It's still going to get fixed. They're not willing to admit that they maybe voted for the wrong guy.
Yeah.
And Hillary Clinton got a lot of flack for calling some of the people who wanted Trump in power as deplorables. But she was right. There was a lot of people, maybe not everybody was, and maybe not everybody wanted to hear that and see themselves as being deplorable. But if you're willing to align yourself with this kind of badness, then, like, it's like the joke. What do they call people in Germany who were willing to vote with the Nazis to get the things that they wanted, even though they didn't want to kill all those people?
Mm-hmm.
You call them Nazis.
Yeah.
And I think the United States, as an example, really made it clear to Canadians, at least, because they got there first, made it clear to Canadians that we can't just let that happen.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing to be gained from it. So I am quite relieved. Like you said, I think it was as good an outcome as we could have expected, but still there's a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah. And I guess we don't have a lot of time to talk about it, but another thing that I wanted to say is that actually, I didn't mention it on the last election that we had, but I worked as a poll worker or not a poll worker. No, it is a polling place, right? Is that where you vote? Polling station?
Yeah.
For both the provincial and now the federal elections. And it's been pretty interesting to get sort of insight into the back end.
The process.
And so like one of the things, for example, is that I see a lot of people, there's discussion of sort of voting fraud. Right?
Right.
And I'm not saying that voting fraud doesn't or can't happen, right? I don't know enough about the complex logistics of it to make a meaningful statement on that, right? There's not a lot of training. I worked for one day, right? I'm not on that.
You're not an expert.
And I'm not on the fraud prevention team, but it's just interesting because hearing some of the stuff that people are talking about and are taking issue with, just having a little bit more of that expertise, the training, whatever. And I can understand a lot of stuff that people are looking at and, critiquing or is making them nervous it's the wrong place to be looking, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because just as a poll worker, one of the things that I'm thinking about, right, is people talk about election fraud a lot. Are there insecurities in the system that I can see as an individual where like, how would the
exploitable weaknesses,
how would the people at my polling place, cheat, right? How would somebody in my position do some sort of like illegal like vote changing or whatever? And first off, on principle, right, I would not want a system that is exploitable, right? Because I don't want my guy to win more than I want the system to be secure, because I want my vote. And I want the system that we agree on to be how it works, right? I think the system should be changed, right? I don't think it should be first past the post. But while it is, I still want, when I go somewhere and I like cast a vote, I want it to count and I want it to be meaningful and I want it to be the thing that we've all agreed upon. So, if I showed up and there, and it was like, oh, they cheated and they stole the election and it was in my favor, right? I wouldn't want that, right?
Right.
Because that would allow, if it can happen in general, it can happen in either direction. Right.
I mean, it's the sense of fairness matters.
Yeah.
Not to everybody, but clearly it matters to you and it matters to me.
Well, it's less than fairness. It's more just if we have a social contract, if we've all agreed upon something, it should work that way. In the same way that I don't think, individual police officers should be able to execute extrajudicial
justice.
Yeah. I think that if it's an agreed upon system, we should work within that system. And, I'm not saying that you can never have revolution. I'm not saying that you should never like break the law, for example, right? If it's immoral, but broadly speaking, in cases like this where I think there's less of a case for breaking the law and I would rather the system work. But so when I was looking at it, the thing that I came away with is not that it's entirely impossible for anybody to do sort of voter fraud, but that the cost, is high, the risk is high, and the benefit is relatively low. That in order for something to happen and for you to get away with it, you either would need a lot of other people who are not very good at their job or looking the other way. And even after that, the checks and balances mean that if there was anything weird happen, right, that set off any alarm anywhere, that you would be extremely accountable, right? That it's very easy to narrow it down to the source of the issue. If any problem were there, my initials are on the back of every single ballot that is in my box, right? I have signed off on a sheet that was based off of there's a seal with a number on it that I've written the number on a sheet and signed it, and that I had the supervisor of the polling place sign it, and then that has been itself put in a box and sealed with a sticker with a number that I had written on the sheet before I put it in the box. So there's all these checks and balances that mean that it's really hard for something to happen that doesn't get tied back to me.
Right. But I guess the part that I'm hearing though is that when you keep ballots manual, there are so many more hands involved than if you use voting machines that it actually makes it harder to do anything at a scale that's going to have an impact.
I would
and get away with it.
So I don't know quite enough. What I would say is that I think to some extent that is true, which is that I think you can manipulate technology more readily, and that's why there are
more efficiently.
Yeah. Whereas when it's physical ballots, I mean, to some extent, right, you could just say the wrong number, right? But I have ballots with my initials on it that are in envelopes, right, that are indicative of who I voted for, and
it's auditable.
Yeah, it is a lot more auditable to my knowledge, and again, I'm not saying, because I wouldn't know what the vulnerabilities of the system are, right? Because also, I think people who are looking to exploit vulnerabilities of the system are also going to be a lot more sophisticated than me, right? Mm-hmm. And, you know, I haven't done research into it. I haven't looked at it. It was more just, you're sitting there for a while and some people are coming up and talking about voting fraud, right? Mm-hmm. And like, how are you guys going to make sure? Oh, can I really mark this in pencil instead of pen, right? People are worried about and thinking about that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And so when that's the conversation, it makes me think about that sort of thing. And when I'm looking at it as a layperson, like, one of the things that people were very critical of was that there was video of a ballot box in a car, right?
From one of the advanced polls you're talking about.
I don't know the video because I haven't seen it myself.
Well, no, if it happened before, if it was available before the election, right?
I assume it was from an advanced poll. It might have not been from an advanced poll, and it's just a material, right? But then when I look at all of the checks and balances, the accountability, all that stuff, again, not to say that it's entirely impossible for a ballot box being in a car to be linked to some sort of voter fraud that I'm not aware of, right? Mm-hmm. But that knee-jerk reaction that people have of, this is not okay, this is obviously unsecure, whatever, that is not the place, you know, it being there, it being something that somebody has taken home is not the thing you should be worried about, right? When you look at all the checks and balances, and I was actually able to explain some stuff to people at the polls, right? Where it's like, here's the procedure, here's all the sign off and stuff, here's the external accountability. So when you see a box in a car, right, this is how hard it was and all the things that people have set up specifically so you can do that and it's considered safe. There's some level where you are putting trust in another person because there's somebody counting it, there's somebody, you know, putting the vote in the box, but wherever possible, they have tried to remove trust from the system and make it so that the system
they're not removing trust, they're removing the requirement of trust.
Yeah.
Where it's necessary, the necessity of trust, mm-hmm. right? I feel like there's a difference, like that distinction matters.
I think to some extent it's a little bit semantic, but I get what you're saying broadly. Yeah, but so it's just been interesting to experience it. It did give me a very different perspective. And I was talking with my girlfriend who did the polls with me, and she was saying that she thinks that, and I agree, that it would be a good idea if possible that if this was like part of like civics class or whatever, that people should sign up to the polls, that it should be some sort of like mandatory thing to be related to this in some way. And when we were talking about it, I was like, I don't know if there's literally enough like jobs at the polls to let people do it as a mandatory thing. But I think at the very least, like having some sort of front facing version of like essentially like elections training, right? Yeah. Maybe having like a stat holiday where everybody's got to do a modified elections training thing to be informed about the vote and how it works.
It could even be something like Schoolhouse Rocks. I mean, is it important that people actually participate, or just important that they understand the process so that they can have faith in the process and trust it a little bit, that it's not nearly as vulnerable as people might be making it out to be?
Well, yeah.
So because when you understand the process, then I think it becomes a little bit more transparent.
Yeah, because I literally was able to speak to somebody who was talking about the votes in the cars, right? Or the ballot box in the car. And I was like, here's my seal, here's where I signed off on a sheet, right? I can show you all the stuff, all the checks and balances that mean that I can't just take it home, tear it open, and mess with the stuff inside. And
because if you do, it'll be obvious that it's done.
And they seemed like comforted. They said, oh, I didn't know that. That actually makes sense, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think it really is one of those places where there's a lot of mistrust, and I think skepticism in the government and skepticism in the systems around us is valid and fair. But I think skepticism has to be paired with education. It has to be paired with you trying to get informed, and you have to verify it. It can't just be your sort of gut reaction. Otherwise, it's not helpful or useful.
So maybe specifically that the skepticism is born, I don't want to say ignorance because that has a really bad connotation with it, but it's skepticism based on a healthy distrust that lacks critical information that would make them feel better about it.
Yeah.
Right? Like you're suspicious. Great. The information, it doesn't take a lot of information to dispel that distrust.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that's a good place for today. We didn't actually go through any questions, but we, I don't know. Well, it is what it is. Anyways.
So we are very glad that I'm very glad that the Elections Canada seems to be working properly, both to give us the opportunity to vote, but also protect the integrity of the vote as a representation of what people want. And one of the biggest things to me was the turnout. It looks like that for a country where it's not legally required, it's one of the best turnouts we've had in about 30 years, which is about almost 70% of the eligible electorate actually voted.
Yeah.
Which is amazing. It's great.
So there we go. To finish up, we'd like to give a huge thank you to our patrons on Patreon. That is Michael Devries, Irvin Ruiz, Hoshi127, Nora Klimek, and Miguel, who are supporting us on the credited level. We'd also like to thank all the people who support us however you do. So thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.
Komoda.